What is as light as a feather, yet can't be held for even 2 minutes by most human beings? Hi, I'm Angel, and this is the Authentic Action Podcast. Welcome. Today, I want to talk about trust and dysregulation, or really rather, trust and re-regulation, and how we need trust of ourselves first and foremost, and of each other, or maybe that's first and foremost. I don't know, but we need trust in order to have re-regulation in our own systems and in our broader system. So I was thinking a lot this week about individual and societal personas, or like the hats that we put on when we take on different roles as individuals and as societies, more broadly speaking, like democracies and republics and um, dictatorships and all those sorts of um, I was looking for a summarizing little little fragment of word, but anyway, you get the idea. And I was just really reflecting on how the recent erosion of trust in our society has led to a swing toward that more dictatorship way of running things, because trust is so fundamental to working things out. To it's not really that things will be perfect, or maybe even not necessarily so much better, although that is debatable, I would say. But it's about the recovery, it's about the resilience, it's about our ability to regain trust when we have a misunderstanding, and that comes, or to regain balance when we get out of balance, and that comes from over time building trust. And I was just reflecting on how I have also had an erosion of trust in my own personal life, my own personal relationship with myself over the last several years, I would say. And that has made it more difficult to re-regulate my own system, my own physical systems, emotional systems, and I mean, all the systems, they're all interconnected in my brain here. So let me just back up a bit, try to untangle all of this big emotional basket that that I'm bringing to the table here. So, um, I've been working as a substitute teacher almost a year now, and in that, getting to use my training in special education, and in that experience, I'm reminded about so many things, but one of them profoundly is this piece of dysregulation, and how big a role it plays in so much of the dysfunction of our system. So in our education system, the dysregulation of the students, of the parents, of the teachers is really at the root of the dysfunction of so many of these beautiful systems, or intentions, systems with beautiful intentions behind them. And as I think we all are aware, there's the ideal, the beautiful system, and then there's the actuality. And often there's a big gap between the two of what we think, how we think things could or should be, and how they actually are in the day to day. And I think, if we're honest, that plays out in, at least from my perspective, every aspect of life. And I could start out wide into the big systems and just come right back to the place that I have the most locus of control, which is myself. And I certainly have in this arena areas where I have an ideal and then I have the actuality. So like I have an ideal way that I would work out every day and take care of my own emotional regulation by meditating every day first thing and um, noticing when I become dysregulated and taking a time out and doing some counting. That's something that works well for me. Um, and actually, that's the ideal. Like I know that is what I would like to have be the actuality, but the actuality is some degrees from that, depending on the day I look at it. Some days it's real close and I'm, patting myself on the back and thinking, oh, maybe I'm even in that pocket, as they call it. And then other days it's like, oh, whoa, maybe I can't even quite remember ever being there or um that I ever really, had a grasp on it. And most days I'm somewhere on the spectrum between those extremes. And I think that's true of most of my fellow human beings, at least from my observation, that's how it seems. And again, to tie it back to working in the school system with students and other teachers, other staff, I would say um, that this is true of those I have noticed. We tend to we tend to have waves of better and worse, of nearer and farther from that ideal that we have in our mind. And sometimes we're not, sometimes we're clear on what that ideal is, and a lot of the times we're not even really clear on what that ideal is. So it's natural that we might be not that close to it. If we stay, we just sort of have this agitated feeling that we don't really understand why we're agitated. And if we stop and think about it, we might realize, oh, it's because we aren't actually living up to the ideal, the expectation that we have for ourselves, or a lot of times for me, it starts with a criticism of someone else, something outside of me, because that's so much easier to see, of course. But ultimately, if I can sit through that process of self-reflection, I can get back to see that it's actually something in myself that I am, um, not bringing to that ideal standard, and that's making me feel self-critical or agitated or unworthy, all those kinds of feelings that don't feel so great. Speaking of feelings, I forgot to mention earlier my book, The Shift, which is all about feelings. Its working title is The Shift: Own Your Emotions, Own Your Life. And it's really about emotional regulation. So if you're interested in getting on my mailing list, my waiting list, I'm really hoping to have that published really, really soon, which I've been saying for a year, but really, 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 I'm targeting January 2025 right now. Of course, it can't be done till it's done, so we'll just see. Um, but in the meantime, I have come to lots of great tools in the compilation of these tools to create this book, The Shift, and that's what I've been uh, trying to share more and more of and utilize more and more of in my own life. And in doing that, I've just become more and more aware of how there are these tools. We're all a little different, of course, so it's not like there's one tool that works for everyone, and yet there are a handful of tools that work for most of us. And really, there are probably a handful of tools that do work for nearly, gosh darn, nearly all of us. The first one being the breath, breathing, bringing your awareness into the breath, because the breath is directly tied to our heart rate, and our heart rate and our breathing rate um, are directly tied to our vagus nerve, our emotional regulation system. And so it's like a direct route in to re-regulating or hitting the reset button on that system, that nervous system that can get out of sync. Our breathing and our heart rate can get out of sync. Our brain waves can get out of sync. And then it's chaos. And then it's really hard to learn anything or work anything out or communicate effectively. And, all those things are difficult enough without adding dysregulation, which basically makes it virtually impossible. Now, I say virtually because, as a little pinky finger asterisk, many of us have lived in some state of dysregulation for so much of our lives that we have learned to cope. We have learned to learn some things and, develop strategies for compartmentalizing. And so there's always ways around things. There's always ways to heal things. It's one of my deep-seated beliefs, foundational core core beliefs that I'm structuring a lot of my work around. So I wanted to make that clear. But back to my ramble at hand. Um, I read something recently that was something to the effect of that learning to regulate our own emotions, or I think it was talking about teaching others to recognize dysregulation and learn how to re-regulate is a life-saving skill set. And I have to agree, just reflecting on my own life and also reflecting on this last year of working with, especially with students who are in the special education um, segment of our public education system, and being reminded again how big a role dysregulation plays in the dysfunction in that systemic level. And if you look at homelessness, you look at abuse, you look at so many factions, you look at the incarceration, pretty much anywhere you look that makes you put on a scowly face, there's emotional dysregulation involved. And so conversely, the flip side of um, that is that learning to regulate and helping others learn to regulate or re-regulate ourselves is I really do believe one of the best things that we can be doing right now. If you look at the thing that really inspired me to write The Shift is this huge escalation in suicide rates, and I see that in my own personal life and around me on the streets, and then of course in the stats, broadly speaking. And and again, that comes from dysregulation in the moment, not having the tools to re-regulate and just spiraling down into dysregulation, which I can attest can happen so, so, so quickly to some of us. I'm one of those people, and I can go from just perfectly fine to really, really far from okay in a pretty short, astoundingly short period of time sometimes when the things are stacked up, just so. And when I don't believe that when I don't remember that I have the tools, or that I don't believe that those tools are effective, that's when that can happen. Conversely, if I have the tools, I know that I can use those tools effectively. I know to recognize when I'm getting dysregulated. It's just that simple of saying, like, oh, hey, I recognize I'm getting shaky. I recognize my voice is getting quaky. I recognize I'm having trouble breathing. I recognize my limbs are getting cold. I recognize getting hot inside and getting heated. I recognize I'm speaking quickly or I'm shutting down and not speaking. Those are all signs of dysregulation. And there are many, but there are some that are fairly common. And once you start, those are signs that I have come to recognize are signs that I've become dysregulated that I didn't used to recognize. And that's why I'm bringing it up and want to talk about it. I think many of us go through life, especially if you have chronic dysregulation, as many of us do. And I would dare say maybe more and more of us do in today's climate, although of course, I only have the perspective of there is only now, so um, I don't I don't know to what extent that's true. I haven't looked at the stats. But I bet there probably are some stats. Maybe somebody knows. Anyway, it's not really the point. The point is that in my own experience and certainly in my own body, dysregulation is at the heart of a lot of tragic outcomes. And therefore, re-regulation, I feel, is at the heart of turning a lot of that around. And it's my mission, my focus, one of my main missions and focuses to um, cultivate that in myself so that I can hold safe space for others as they do that, and also to help teach those skills and tools and help explore those skills and tools because I don't think we're ever really done. I think I'm a lifelong learner, and I think we humans are ever evolving and learning. And as we do that, as things keep changing, we need to keep up leveling those skills. Right now, we have so much new technology, so many things have changed and seem outdated, including our educational system. And so it's a good time to bring up one of my main sponsors to the Authentic Action podcast, pardon me, is the Authentic Action Academy, where we aspire to help develop more after school and supplemental education programs. Pardon me again. This is funny because I almost always have water here and I don't. And I told myself to get some, and then I thought, you can make it through a half-hour podcast without water. If I need to, I will pause, but I'm really trying to get through this thing authentically and without too much editing. I know it's a little silly, but let's see if we can do it because I like being silly. So we have two sponsors for the Authentic Action podcast, and one of them, as I was just trying to get out before I started to choke on my own breath, is the Authentic Action Academy, where we are developing after school programs and other supplemental educational, alternative educational programs. Um, with an emphasis on being action oriented, as the name implies, and also an emphasis on diversity, on multisensory, on bringing together the old with the new, the um, high tech and the low tech, pretty much any way that you can think of. And we are trying to be innovative and think of new ways of bringing together those tried and true methods with the new technologies that we have. So um, we have a new just seated community over in the school community. That's SKOOL with a school with a K. And you can find us there and join if you're interested. So we would welcome that. We welcome your participation, your interest. There will be more coming soon on that. Hopefully, a little starter curriculum to build on, and we will be moving forward. And our other wonderful, much less new sponsor is the Sleeping Dragons Company. This is my own company, which I started over 20 years ago now, and which specializes in earth and people friendly products, particularly phthalate free perfumes and aromatherapy blends, hard to find essential oils and herbs, and self love care products, including a really delightful line of heart shaped stones. So check out their line at www.sleepingdragons.com headhuttco.com, and that should take you over to the Etsy shop where we are revamping our line of aromatherapy perfumes and phthalate-free fragrances just for you. Check it out. Back to the conversation about emotional re-regulation and emotional dysregulation and why it is so important to get that foundational piece right before we bother moving forward with trying to learn and teach, because learning and teaching gets like 10x easier and more effective when we are regulated. When we're regulated, then we can get in what is these days called the flow state, and we can remember things easier. We can think through things more effectively. When we are dysregulated, we have what's commonly called brain fog. And again, there's a spectrum like with so many things. So sometimes, when I'm working with these kids, I often see what I would call the rage, the boil up in them. And I've even worked with a couple of them who, when we work with just trying to become more aware of emotions, we can go through emojis, and some of these kids can pull up that rage in an instant. One of them in particular I'm thinking of, he could be a fantastic actor one day. He's got that quality in him. And that reminds me of something I want to bring up, which is that oftentimes those of us who get dysregulated more easily, like this kid I'm thinking of, or many of the kids that I work with in particular, and myself in particular, oftentimes that's frowned upon quite heavily. And I was even incarcerated, or I was going to say institutionalized, but I was incarcerated when I was a juvenile, a juvenile delinquent. First, it's called a child in need of supervision, and then I was a juvenile delinquent. Were some of the many labels that were placed on me, and I don't like to dive too deep into that because I really think that ultimately labels have been, in fact, there have been meta studies that show that labeling, even the positive label of gifted, which was also put on me, can have very negative effects over time with our sense of identity. So just a little pinky finger asterisk that I want to add in there as I'm talking about my own labels and people's labels. But um, sometimes labels do serve us well, and that's why we create them and have them. But I just want us to keep in mind that a label is not the person, not the thing it's labeling. It's just a way of trying to talk about or understand something. So, now I've forgotten where I was. Talked myself right out of remembering what I was labeling. Um, when we label being an emotional person as a negative only, and we don't acknowledge, and I've been talking this whole talk for the most part about how much of a problem dysregulation is. So I'm not trying to suddenly say, oh, it's great. I'm just saying that having the tendency to be dysregulated easily is also correlated with many positives. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and to explore that a little bit, especially for someone like me who works with children who are easily dysregulated. And what made me think of it is I mentioned the student who's got the skills, developing to be a great actor. Just for one example, many of the kids I work with have, they're so diverse, actually. I don't want to, again, start labeling. There's everything you can think of, but the key is to try to get underneath that a little bit. Why is this person becoming dysregulated more easily? Um, I listened recently to a great video about the nuanced differences between ADHD and autism and complex PTSD and giftedness, for example. And it was such a great video with a great quick conversation about how even though many of those labeled baskets of disorder, for lack of a better term right now, have overlapping outcomes or overlapping symptoms. One of those being emotional dysregulation, for example. There are different reasons that lead to that emotional dysregulation in many or all of these different, you know, uh, profiles, let's call them. So, for example, ADHD can lead to emotional dysregulation because a person can become overwhelmed with just too many things on the table, literally. And I'm looking around at my table right now and seeing many classic signs of ADHD. There's this struggle with executive function, which leads to things, too many tabs left out on the computer, too many things left out on the table. And while this can be this person the positive side of this is that I might be able to juggle a lot of things at once sometimes, or dive deeply into certain interests of mine. The flip side is that I might start to drop all those balls that I'm juggling, so to speak, and and just have a big mess. And frankly, when I was younger, I was doing a much better job of juggling, keeping those balls in the air a lot of the time. And as I've struggled with more and more health issues, this has become more and more of a challenge for me, and I've had to try to really learn how to try to juggle fewer balls, and it is an ongoing challenge for me. And sometimes that fact alone can lead me to feel overwhelmed and dysregulated. So that's one example. Um, to continue with that example, autism might lead to uh, sensory overwhelm in a different way that can look similar from the outside. It might also lead to emotional dysregulation, but like via a different path. So, um, trying to think of a way of explaining it that's not going to sound ultra similar, and part of that I think is because I am a little bit both, a little bit autistic and a little bit ADHD, a little bit gifted, all those things. So I all those overlaps live to various extents of comfortable in me, but and it's been a lot to try to untangle for that reason. Um but I think it's worth trying, because I think when we understand the underlying cause of the dysregulation, it can really help us get to the bottom of it. And I'm a living example of how sometimes those causes can be different, even in the same person at different times. So, um, an autistic trait might cause a sensory overload that could just really cause a meltdown of the system. And um and then in me, the PTSD in me maybe, or, I don't really think I want to get too far into the label, because I'm liable to do it wrong. And also it doesn't matter that much, I think, the labels. But the point of it, the underlying cause does matter, in that we can better control it, better stop it, better get it under control and re-regulate when we understand the underlying cause. So if it's a sensory issue, which might be caused by autism, for example, then, um, if it's too much light, putting on sunglasses or getting out of that lighting. If it's too much sound, putting on headphones or getting out of that area where there's too much sensory stimulation is often the best first line of defense. And to be honest, that's a good line of defense anytime we're feeling dysregulated, because that once you're in that dysregulated state, then the system is sort of already overwhelmed and overregulated, and so pulling back on that sensory input is a good idea for any of us. But again, back to understand how you got there is also really crucial for understanding how to keep it happening as much in the future. So, um, an ADHD, a person with ADHD related dysregulation might thrive in a high stimulated area most of the time, but then needs some checks and balances to make sure that, like, good heavens, clean your desk, girl, which is something I have to say to myself often, and I just struggle with. And if I sometimes sometimes I navigate it well and I have things in place that are working, and then other times that falls apart and I have to start over and hit the reset button and try to develop new patterns and habits or get different help or whatever the case is. Um, but that's just a quick example that comes to mind, and I guess I will not harp on that anymore, but just to try to demonstrate and remind us all that there's different reasons that we get dysregulated. It could have to do with an PTSD, like a more of a traumatic response. There could be something triggering a somatic memory in the body that even we are not aware of, where suddenly we become, we go into a panic state or we have a lot of anxiety come up and we don't really understand why. This is very common with trauma, and um, and very common for these to overlap. These all overlap in me for sure. So I had giftedness, labeled on me, which then masked the ADHD and the autism, um, which the combination of that ended, up having me institutionalized and put in a lot of dangerous situations where then I accumulated a lot of trauma in the body. And so there's probably no untangling it all perfectly, but in understanding that, it helps me to develop better tools and strategies for re-regulating myself and for setting up a life that best suits me, given my own life story, basically. And I think ultimately that's really what it's all about, finding a life story that fits you well, where you're the hero of your story and you feel good about yourself and you feel good about your story, and you can die knowing that you lived your fullest, best life, and that instead of feeling like, gosh, I never figured out how to be a regulated person, or I never closed that gap between the person that I wanted to be or I thought I should be and the person that I was on a day-to-day basis. And I think, again, I think most of us come in on somewhere on the spectrum. I don't think most of us aren't going to be perfect in that, but I do think that most of us could also improve where we're coming in on that. And part of my mission in this life is to help you and I do that. So, um, yeah. Again, I thank you for stopping by and letting me ramble and share this moment with you. I hope if you've had any thoughts or feelings about that you want to share, that you will look me up. If you're watching me on YouTube, there will be a link there to do that with. And if you're listening to this podcast somewhere else, then you might have to do a little bit more digging, but you can find me as ZGALA and as Angel Lily in lots of places. So I hope you will look me up if you've got some thoughts about this. And I also hope that you will check out our sponsors, um, the Authentic Action Academy, where we are developing new and improved after school and supplemental and alternative educational programs, and the Sleeping Dragons Company, where we are developing a whole new exciting line of phthalate free perfumes and aromatherapy blends, and have been carrying a solid line of hard to find essential oils and herbs and other self-care items for over 30 years now. I believe that is true. Heavens. That's kind of remarkable to say and to realize. Anyway, look them up, the Authentic Action Academy and the Sleeping Dragons Company. And if you're interested in my upcoming book, The Shift, don't forget to get on my mailing list and you can check that out. I also have some other books I've already published and you can check those out on Amazon, and I appreciate it if you do. I'm going to wrap it up and say thank you again for joining me today. Thank you for being you and let me be me. I hope you will join me in my quest to improve your own emotional state by learning some of these re-regulation techniques. And oh, that reminds me, I was going to go through one of the basic ones that works for nearly everyone, and that is a breathing technique. That's, one of that handful of techniques that I was mentioning, and I meant to do that earlier, but let's just do it now. So the first step in this breathing technique is to become more mindful of your own breathing. So if it's safe for you to put both feet on the floor and straighten your spine, and just bring your attention to your breath and just notice, are you holding your breath? Are you tight? Where are you breathing from? Are you breathing from up here in the neck and the throat? Are you breathing from the chest? Or can you start to breathe more from the belly? And if you can, start to slow your breathing down and drop more into your belly with your awareness, bringing that diaphragm down into the belly, just relaxing the belly and slowing that breath down. And as you slow that breath down, maybe start to count and notice. And if you can, extend the exhale as you count. So maybe you're breathing in at a 1, 2, and then 1, 2, 3, exhale. And see if you can make those counts a little bit longer and a little bit slower. Breathing in for 3 and exhaling for 4. And as you do that, see if you can start to make it more and more even. Breathing in for 4 and exhaling for 4. And if you find that's a little bit difficult and it feels like it brings tension, bring it back to a little bit. So let's settle in at 3 and try to do some box breathing, it's called. So we're going to breathe in for 3, and then we're going to hold for 3, 2, 3, and then we're going to exhale, 2, 3, and then we're going to hold that exhale, 2, 3, and then inhale, 2, 3, and hold, 2, 3, and exhale, 2, 3. It's hard to do it perfectly and say it, but hopefully you're getting the idea. And that is called box breathing. And once you get it at a 2 or a 3 at an even pace, then you can start to go a little bit slower, longer, try to get it to 4, maybe even 5 or 6. Again, you want it to be relaxed. You want it to feel, not strained. And so find a place where you can do that steadily at a steady pace. In, hold, exhale, hold for 3 to 5 rounds if you can. That is a great way to reset your nervous system if you're feeling dysregulated, and just a great thing to focus on anytime, anywhere. You can do that silently in your head, even if you're like somewhere, where you're starting to feel yourself get dysregulated. Um, if you're driving, do be careful. There's a few places where you want to maybe pull over or do a modified version where you're just focusing on increasing the exhale is a great strategy to start if you're somewhere where you don't have, the capacity to give it all so much of your mindfulness, because you need to give that mental capacity to something else. So, even when I'm teaching, I can't really give my full mental capacity to counting like that, but I can start to just try to slow my breathing down, bring my awareness to my breathing, and increase the length of the exhales. And that's something that most of us can do, even again, if we have to put our attention somewhere else. So that's a tool that I offer you that I hope will help, that I think almost all of us could use almost anytime, anywhere, to help bring us a little bit more regulation if we're starting to notice that we're feeling dysregulated. And I encourage you to learn some of the signs and symbols, or the signs that happen in your own body when you're becoming dysregulated. And again, they can vary for all of us, but that's a great place to start so that you can do your part to help increase regulation. And as I mentioned at the start of this, I do believe that by paying attention to our own dysregulation and improving our own skills for re-regulation as individuals, that we will be improving our greater systems as a whole, our education systems, our political systems, our healthcare systems. Any system that you can think of is going to be made better when more of us learn to re-regulate, and we can hold that space for others. So I know that was a little bit of a long ramble. I am passionate about this. Like I mentioned, I'm writing a book about it. I've been working on it for some years. And the reason for that is because emotional dysregulation has played a huge part in my own struggles with, my health, with my relationships, with my success financially, and in all ways. And as I also mentioned, there are many reasons for that. My my neurological wiring, my experiences, and my tools and strategy, my toolbox. And the toolbox is an area that I have the easiest and greatest capacity for control over. So this is an area where I am passionate about cultivating more of that control, cultivating better skills and tools and techniques, and sharing those with others. Hopefully, I've done a little of that today. I thank you again for stopping by and allowing me to attempt to do that. And I want to close with my opening joke. I have a penchant for silly jokes, and this one is no exception. So, what is light as a feather, and yet most humans can't even hold it for 2 minutes? You may have guessed it already. It's your breath. Ciao for now. Take care.